today to your newspaper in the Taiwan Lecture Series Part 2, where we are moving to the politics of Chineseness, Sinophone, worlds, whatever. And it's SHIH Chih-yu, who is National Chair Professor of the Ministry of Education and University Chair Professor of Political Science at National Taiwan University, who is a great thinker. You will hear that immediately. He's not the 0815 general political scientist, but he really is something. He's developed a concept that he calls post-Chineseness, combining the fields of international relations, cultural politics, intellectual history, and you will see how he basically challenges with this concept and with many of the other concepts that he will be introducing today, essentialized notions of Chineseness, of anythingness, of Germanness, Chineseness, etc., in existing scholarship through the revelation of the multiplicity and complexity of the issues of Chineseness, Germanness, etc., by strategically conceiving insiders, outsiders, and those in between, and the process of needing to unlearn from all of them. He's the author of many, many books, and check them out. They're all interesting, and he's just given me 2 new titles that are appearing these days. One of them is Relations and Roles in China's Internationalism, and the other is Confucian Governmentality and Socialist Autocracy in Contemporary China. So you can see that he brings in Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian, and other thoughts into international relations, and he does that in a very brilliant way, and I will not say more because he can say much more in a much better fashion. Welcome, SHIH Chih-yu.
Thank you very much for having me here. Oh, okay. Thank you. Today, I think I'm not going to repeat whatever I've been writing about in the book on post-Chineseness. We go right into the very hot topic of security, international security and national security. That's what political science is supposed to do. But I'm questioning the notion of national security in terms of how the literature has framed the issue of national security and how to promote security and the issue of security among allies and the populations supposed to be belonging to their allies, and how to popularize the notion of security through securitization and desecuritization. And one of the motivation that get me into this literature is the claimed civilizational progression that's been achieved in the European security community. There is the sense of countries belonging to the European security communities will resolve things peacefully. They will not resort to war any longer if they have dispute, if they have conflict. They're going to do it peacefully by subscribing to rules of the regimes, so people would follow procedures to resolve things, resolve their dispute. Why do people have to follow rules in order to resolve their dispute? That's my question. And why people think resolving dispute by following commonly or consensually accepted rules is such a great achievement? That gets me very puzzled, especially when people who study security community, especially European security community, look around the world and look at, for example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization or Southeast Asian ASEAN. They will look at this security community and question the usefulness of them because they don't have any rules to preach. They have no values to preach. Why do you call it a security community? If you don't have common rules, there's no values. Why do you get together? So you must be, in some calculative way, trying to protect your own regimes. So they call these regimes, for example, in the in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as alliance of autocrats. Why do you come together? There's no other reason than protecting your own interest. Not like we in Europe who can come together and decide that we'll restrain our national interests. We'll restrain our desire to pursue what we consider to be our national interests, our national goals. So the ability to resort to self-constraint is a show of civilizational progress, as we could not do that in the past. And then you understand, it was because they look back into the history that European countries have had conducted World War I, World War II, there was Holocaust, there was all kind of civil war, and before that there was colonial conquest, the colonial wars, dividing the world into colonies and take advantage of their colonies, exploit the resources there, enslave people. And in order to do that, they fought each other in order to cut their colonies into pieces and accept each other. So if you look at the European history, you realize why they consider the European security community such an advancement in civilization. Sovereign states were supposed to be sovereign, autonomous, pursuing their own interests. They're not supposed to be restrained. Now they are willing to restrain themselves. That's what I think why there is a sense of achievement. The sense of civilization achievement was already there, I think, in the early 20th centuries. If you read Ilias, for example, that he would tell you what kind of progress that the people have already achieved. We are no longer as brutal or as despotic as before. We people become civilized. But then there comes Holocaust, here comes World War II. So people really have to think critically about themselves and change themselves, change your behavior. And they find out a way to do that. The resolution, of course, is to come together. So with the practice during post-World War II period, maybe 30 years, 40 years, and through the end of Cold War, you have this wonderful sense of success and civilizational progress that eventually the Europe won out because Europe won the Cold War because of their ability to restrain themselves in pursuing, in desiring only for themselves. They come together. And that's how they can look at the world and questioning why security communities elsewhere don't do the same. And then they have this mission of preaching the European model, the European security community, which desecuritize members of the security community for each other. So they're no longer being a threat to each other. But if you look at ASEAN, for example, that's not what happened. There's no rules that people subscribe to together. We will talk about this next week. But this kind of a security community thinking, trying to desecuritize members belonging to the same security community, but securitize all those other so-called actors outside security community, consider them as a potential threat because they don't know how to restrain their behavior. They don't have the sense of self-restraint. We have the sense of self-restraint, so we have to teach them how to learn self-restraint. And they look at the world, and there's civil war, there's ethnic cleansing, there's human rights violation. The world appears to be chaotic in the eyes of the so-called security community. What they have forgotten, I think this common sense, but they have forgotten in the literature of security community, is that all those problematic sovereign state, nation state in the world were almost crafted by the European colonial powers. I no longer call either North American or the European or Australian, New Zealand, as the West. I no longer call them the West. I think the West is not a very revealing concept. I substitute colonizer states for the notion of the West, as they call Shanghai Cooperation Organization member state as alliance of autocrats. They are autocrats. But then European security could be alliance of colonizer state because they look around the world, around all those post-colonies and feeling threatened by post-colonies crafted by them into sovereign state. Colonies were never sovereign state, were never national actors. But after World War II, they, through so-called decolonization, they all become sovereign states. They all become sovereign nations. But they're not sovereign nations. They're only sovereign nation in name. They're being divided ethnically. They suffer ethnic cleavages, religious cleavage, like in the Middle East. When the colony was set up, when the regimes were being controlled by the European colonizer states, they don't divide their nation states according to the religious lines. So you have religious cleavages, you have ethnic cleavages, you have linguistic cleavages, you have all kinds of social cleavages in each post-colonies, now called sovereign state. And of course, they suffer cleavages. As a matter of fact, historically, different ethnic groups or religious groups did not really have to fight each other. Many of them coexist with each other peacefully. They find a way to deal with each other. I've been doing some field research in southern Vietnam and looking at the Cambodian and Vietnamese, Chinese communities, look at how they, practicing festivals of other communities and live together in a superficial way. Sometimes in a, if you have mixed family, you have mixed marriage, of course, and your children grew up in different cultural and religious tradition, then it's not superficial because they can automatically practice whatever festivals require of them. But many, of course, are superficially respecting each other, but this is a way that they come together and live together. However, if you become a sovereign state, all these different groups suddenly become a sovereign state. And somebody would have to lead the regime, and this group would have to depend on the former colonizer state. They have to collude in a way so that the exploitation of mineral resources or plantation resources can continue to be exported to the former colonizer states. So they are dependent on the colonizer state. And the colonizer state can easily topple the local regime because they're suppressive, they're military run, they're strongmen, and they're ideologically incorrect, of course. So you have to depend on them, and they can continue to exploit you. And then you distribute whatever residual or surplus revenue you had with your own groups, and then you exploit the other group. So the other group will rise up to oppose you. Then you have all kinds of cleavages, politicized. And then you have your own people neighboring your nation state coming to the rescue. Then you have war. So you have civil war, you have ethnic cleansing, you have all kinds of cleavages. It's a mess. But this is not a mess spontaneously coming up because of the inability to subscribe to rules of these post-colonies. Even calling them post-colony is problematic because you consider them being a piece of colony by themselves. They're not by themselves. There being all kinds of crossing borders activities going on. There used to be ways to coexist with each other peacefully, even though sometimes superficially. But then making them a nation state, autonomous sovereign state, is a way for the European former colonizer states to consider themselves being linear because they let colonies to become nation state. So it's a decolonization. They finished their job. They decolonize all the colonies. They're no longer colonies, even though the same plantation produce the same crops, sending to the colonizer states. It's market. It's international economy. The same slave workers working on the same plantation is free labor now because they got salaries. Nothing changed, except that they have to follow each other because whoever controls the regime definitely would have to be a corrupt regime, suppressive regime. So there's almost no way out. But then we call them nation state. So it's their own responsibility to resolve their social cleavages. It's their own responsibility. If they cannot resolve that, we can teach you how to resolve that. You can have free election, so all the individuals come together, vote a government. But how could they vote their government if they are divided in the first place? If you look at Central Asian state, for example, it's a nomadic population, right? You have groups or families or clans moving on the grassland. Now suddenly they become sovereign nations. So you have all kinds of enclaves in Central Asia. Enclaves create territorial disputes. It's easy for a nation state to block transportation between enclaves and their countries. The transportation blocks, so it's easy to get involved in dispute and you get people killed. But you don't hear report on that, right? It's because their killings, all these disputes don't escalate. They don't escalate. It's not like two neighbors have a territorial dispute. They start fighting each other along the borders. Then they think, I must get allies to balance these guys off. So they look around their neighborhood and then they start setting up alliances. And then they have balance of powers. No, they don't do that. Now we will discuss that, why they don't do that next week. But the thing is, you don't have escalation. You don't have this kind of balance power things. You don't see people desiring more power in order to expand, in order to colonize the other side. So the other sides don't feel threatened the same way a colonizer state in history would feel threatened by another colonizer state in the rest of the world where they fought for colonies. You don't feel the same threatened. And if a colonist or colonial or post-colonial nation when they become so-called sovereign state, autonomous nation state, they have no such feeling of guilty of conducting Holocaust, World War I, expansion, or colonization. They didn't do that in history. They didn't feel the need to restrain themselves. They didn't feel as guilty as European colonizer states. They simply could not organize or coordinate the way that colonizer states are able to organize, coordinate among themselves after the Cold War. So if you compare, then the European colonizer state would think, well, we have a lot to do in the world. We have to preach how to learn self-restraint, and then we have to teach regimes. So that's what we call rules, abiding by rules, the rules-based order. That's become a very popular term these days, and then that's always a reference point when you criticize some autocratic states for violating rules. But those rules are for European states to restrain themselves, not for the colonies. What colonies want? What post-colonists want? They're being divided. They suffer social cleavages. They are not acknowledged as normal states. What all those post-colonists want, what the regimes of post-colonists want, is to be recognized as an equal sovereign state. But they will never get recognition from former colonizer state because they fail liberalism, they fail human rights. They could not achieve peace. Right? So they wouldn't get recognized. So the most important thing for them is to get recognized. The most important thing for the colonizer states is to devise some kind of effective intervention mechanism to transform the post-colonies into a like state. And I think this is freedom and liberty. And this kind of colonies, or this kind of post-colonies, I think is everywhere in the world, even within the colonized states. We have all kinds of migrant community now, right? We not only have migration from post-colonies to former colonized state, we also have migration from former colonized state to colonies. And this had happened for a long time. It's not just happening after the Cold War. It happened historically. So already all kinds of mixed families or migrant communities being established everywhere. So you see this kind of colonies everywhere in the world. So it's not just in post-colonies. And then our topic, of course, is Taiwan. And Taiwan happens to be a post-colony. It's not just happens to be, it has to be. There's no way out. If you're not colonized state, then you're post-colony. If you're post-colony, your problem is to get recognized. And how do you get recognized? You have to act like a liberal democracy. You have to have an open market. Right? So even though your liberal democracy is very problematic, it doesn't matter. If you can help the former colonized states to intervene in another post-colonies, then you can be recognized as a liberal democratic society. And we see that in Northeast Asia, we see that in Southeast Asia. There are a lot of helpers moving themselves up along the ladder from the post-colony to colonized states. So semi-colonized states, that's what we can call them. And of course, this is not a new concept. If you read Wollaston's world system, the concept is already there. But the problem for us is that how we intellectually treating post-colony as an integral autonomous actor can affect their behavior. When people acquire this worldview, this way of looking at the world, divided into or composed of several national actors, and then they have to look at themselves, whether or not they are normal national actors, and they're fighting to get recognition there. And they have a problem. They have an innate sense of inferiority because they could not perform the same way that former colonized states teach them to perform. They could not practice liberalism the same way that was practiced in the colonized states. So they have to hide their illiberal practice. They have to devise all kinds of rituals, like elections, party politics, independent courts. They have to install all those things that they can mimic their former colonized states. So they get recognized. Most of the time they fail, right? So for post-colonies, it's impossible to be themselves. It's impossible to get recognized. It's impossible to achieve sense of equality. Now you have a problem if you have not just the political world, the entire intellectual world look at everything in terms of nation state. And you have to do that because you pay tax, right? Your intellectual property rights have to be registered in certain nation state. Everything is going through the system of nation state. So there's no way for you to get out of nation state. If you get out of nation state, no one would protect you. That's what they say. Of course, you belong to a nation state. No one would protect you either. But you have this epistemological trap that forces you to think that if you belong to a nation state, you are protected. So now you have a post-colony, which we call Taiwan, who similarly suffering all kinds of political, ethnic cleavages, which were not there in the past. Until we become a liberal democracy, all those cleavages becomes more than apparent and become irrelevant, people worry about these potential cleavages in the past when we were under authoritarian regimes. So people try to take care of that through many, many creative ways, successfully or unsuccessfully. And of course, most of the time, suppressively. But once we become a liberal democracy, everything becomes so apparent. People try to desire what they want and do whatever they think that can demonstrate they're being independent, autonomous citizens and making an independent, autonomous state. But they're very anxious about the cleavages because the cleavage simply exposed the vulnerability of not just Taiwan, any post-colonies being autonomous state. They're afraid of the revolution of all this difference, this cleavage being crafted by former colonizer states. They don't have this cleavage in history, right? They, at least not as serious as we see today or under the electoral system under liberal democracy. So Taiwan now, as a post-colony, become autonomous, semi-integral nation state. And the irony, of course, is that we have a series of Taiwan studies which study Taiwan in a way to demonstrate anyone acting on behalf of Taiwan or in the name of Taiwan cannot be defined. Right? We have the agency for change. We have the agency for constantly becoming something different. Isn't that what we have been published on Taiwan in the past decade or longer than a decade? There all seems to be very different studies on many different research agenda, but they all contribute to one important thing, that is Taiwan cannot be defined. A place that cannot be defined cannot be taken, cannot be occupied. Everyone's been different. So we look for agencies, any tiny evidence of agency of whichever corner you can discover in Taiwan, that will be used as a wonderful research subject, research agenda. If you go through this literature on Taiwan study, you feel, wow, great. This is postmodern time. This is, everyone's been different. Everyone can change their life. Everyone get this sense of subjectivities, even though they don't know they have it. We as a scholar can give them voice. So they will have independent subjectivities, even though they don't consciously know or they don't consciously pursue that. It comes to one simple conclusion, that Taiwan cannot be taken, Taiwan cannot be occupied. So there's no way China can claim Taiwan be part of China. If China claimed Taiwan be part of China, it would be a meaningless sentence because Taiwan cannot be defined, right? If no one is thinking of China, or maybe everyone is thinking of it, I don't know. But even though no one is thinking about China doing their research, the result is still the same, that a post-colony taking advantage of its being post-colonies and become a combination of such a variety and continuing evolving into the future in an unpredictable way, so they cannot be taken as Chinese. Isn't that just wonderful? We can just end the story here, right? People can still do research, whatever thing you pick up. I think it's imperative for all postmodern people to find agency in their subject. Even though postmodern people are not supposed to be orthodox or procedure binding, but they all force themselves to find agency in whatever subject they're studying, right? That's something that they cannot get rid of. Right? That's postmodern. So Taiwan become postmodern. It cannot be taken away. But the problem is Taiwan cannot be taken by China. Indirectly, essentialize China as an integral, autonomous actor. Right? If
the subconscious drive or disposition, and people who set up the agenda at a macro level consider Taiwan being a separate part of China. They essentialize China with all those wonderful projects they sponsor. So we call Taiwan study, which is supposed to tell you Taiwan, what Taiwan is not, right? But all this based upon a policy implication or consequence that China is an essential existence, which threatened to take over Taiwan. Once we essentialize China and show why China cannot take over Taiwan, all those wonderful postmodern search for agency come together as the same conclusion. They essentialize Taiwan ontologically, also epistemologically, they destroy Taiwan as an actor. Epistemologically, we destroy Taiwan. But ontologically, we reconfirm it. We reconfirm it by using all those wonderful research to show why Taiwan cannot be taken by China. And I think that's a wonderful example. What a lot of people talk about Taiwan success. They never talk about this kind of Taiwan success. It transcends the kind of a predicament most post-colony faced. Most post-colony, like I said, they suffer ethnic cleavage. They cannot do anything to do with their ethnic cleavage because their regimes is being used, appropriated continuously by the former colonized state in order for the continuous exploitation of the post-colony. Right? So that they have cleavage, they have to continue their cleavage. They reproduce the cleavage, and this cleavage becomes a wedge of the former colonized states to blackmail the regime. So you have to continue to serve us. Right? So this is not just happening transnationally. It's within the post-colony, the regime post-colony. This also happened in the so-called global north. Right? In the United States, you can see the same thing happening. You have the elite circle, which is global, well-connected everywhere. You have the elite circle, which rely on immigrants to provide service from as low as nursing during the pandemic to the AI engineers at the top level. So you have a elite circle teaching their lower middle white population that these immigrants rob you off your jobs. So they learn how to hate immigrants. But as a matter of fact, immigrants supplied and provide service to this global circle of elites, right? And the global circle of elites have these two populations fighting each other. I think the real racism taking place among the victim populations, all those being victimized by the capitalist political economy become racist because there's a way they can think their difficulty. They can think out of their difficulties. It's not their problem, it's all these immigrants. And all these immigrants have to show stronger loyalty to the elite circle in order to continue their job, continue their stay at relatively lower wages in the so-called global north. So you have this kind of I should end at 2 o'clock, right? Yeah, okay. Well, maybe I should quickly wrap up. What I want to argue is that for Taiwan to become part of security community, belonging to Asian NATO or becoming to an ally of whatever Northeast Asia or whatever you can set up for Taiwan as a security community, because Taiwan is a liberal democracy, that's a problematic. There is a problematic reference point, that's European security community. European security community rely on the colonial history to continue colonizations and to appear superior civilizationally and continue to live on their former colonies. And if we consider Taiwan being a worthy partner of the security committee of this kind, this is not going to solve the problem. That's why you will see why when America invaded Iraq, Taiwanese media and some government officials would volunteer to send Taiwanese Marine to Iraq to help fighting there. Wherever you see American killing all over the world, we support it. It's not that we support killing, we support United States. So whatever United States do, we support it. Now, why you have to support it? If you don't support it, then United States will tell your people that you are a corrupt regime. In order to avoid this examination or review by the hegemonic power of how corrupt or illiberal we have been as a political regime, we have to support the United States all the way through. So we didn't really achieve that much success. Our success is that, I think Taiwan's success is that United States has sanctioned officially the Taiwanese liberal democracy. So whatever you do is like a bank check. You are a liberal democracy. You can do whatever you want. So I'll end up here. This is a colonial, this is a colonized liberalism. This is a dependent liberalism. This is not the kind of liberalism that we think all security community should own. Okay, I stop here and maybe entertain a couple of questions.
Fantastic. Is there anybody who wants to start off the round of questions? Who dares? Yes, back there. Can you, those of you who are not in this institute, please just briefly introduce who you are so that
I'm a student here, and I'm a second semester math student. My name's Li Zihan, and I'm from mainland China. Professor, you seem I personally support Taiwan's liberal democracy regime, but it seems to me that you're trying to develop a narrative in which China becomes irrelevant to Taiwan, and you are developing a political or historical or academic narrative of the independence of Taiwan. But I have a question. Then, how do you think of the role on the KMT? I mean, after the occupation of Japan.
Well, KMT actually wasn't there when Japan ruled Taiwan. So they ruled Taiwan afterwards. It was a very important process that made Taiwan and Hong Kong alone the only two places, I think, in the world that when decolonizations taking place, the local population didn't have a chance to take over the regimes. It is a migrant regime taking over when colonial powers left. I think there's not many other places in the world like that. So that makes the colonized population not only anxious, but feel inferior because it was not themselves taking over the regime. And the migrant regime look at the colonized population as being colonized. So they have to be culturally reassimilated into the Chinese culture. Although they didn't really do much on that, but they think that's what should be done. So colonized population would lose dignity even though they already went through decolonization. The only solution, at least practically, the only solution they seem to have is to rely on colonial modernity so that they could look back at the migrant regime and claim that we are actually superior to you. So when decolonization taking place, the colonized population were not, were enthusiastic for a short period of time until they realized they were still inferior under the migrant regime. And that forced them to go back to colonial modernity. That's why you see how Taiwan becomes culturally such a kind of attachment to Japan. But that's imagination. But I think that's what people hope. This colonial modernity could allow them, to enable them to face China. They're not inferior. Quite opposite. The Chinese are inferior because Chinese don't have colonial modernity.
Hello, my name is Maya. I'm also a MATS second semester student. Thank you for your talk. So I do find the theory very interesting and eye-opening that the world is still kind of cut into these two categories, like the former colonizers and the former colonized country that need to kind of make up for it still, even if they are so-called nation states. What I'm wondering is, I see the idea that kind of taking over the Western political regime without questioning it is problematic, also in this framework of needing to legitimize oneself for one's colonial history. But isn't there something outside of this framework and argumentation? Wouldn't you say there's something inherently correct or right about the Western political regime of liberal democracy that outside of this whole legitimizing argumentation would be good to follow or inherently right to have as a state? Like, for example, democracy, human rights, and so on.
No, I don't. I think democracy server, just like today, server evolution of all kinds. And I don't see any democracy can recover from evolution, even historically. We do recover, like Weimar Republic going through World War II, or Japan's Taisho democracy also declined. Then you have World War II. And then perhaps you could argue that American democracy recovered after the defeat of Vietnam War. Perhaps democracy can still recover from recess or evolution when they fought they fight and lose a hegemonic war.
So you think we don't have real democracy either?
Well, I think democracy forces people to think they are individuals. The problem is that people are not just individuals. People belong to groups and belongs to families. And I think that's spontaneous and natural, right? So you need individuality. You also need belonging. And how belonging and individuality come together, I think that's an interesting question. So my taking is that when an autocracy fails, people will develop solidarity among them to recover. And when democracy fails, people would resort to fascism or collectivism in order to recover. So they need groups and they need individualities. But when they failed, when they suffer evolution, like all systems suffer evolution, they resort to means that seemingly come from the other society. But actually everything, both needs are within every society. So I see cycles.
But would there be what would the solution be in terms of specific?
No, I don't have a solution.
Okay, so we're working on that.
I think that's why I see cycles. I don't have a solution.
Can I raise a quick follow-up question and then pass to you? So, for two fingers, are you thinking that democracies that we have now are failing and are going to fail? And unfortunately, I don't want to agree with you, but looking around and looking at the news, I'm afraid you may be right. But will we resort to another circle of autocracy?
Well, we have thought about, for example, deliberative democracy, right? But that couldn't work because democracy fundamentally is a norm. It's like people should have natural rights. People should respect each other's natural rights. When this fails, you cannot recover by teaching people you should respect everyone's rights. This is not going to work. But I think in my work, if this Christian sense of original sin coming back, so people would feel that they have to restrain themselves because they have original sin, they're evil by existing here. But this also have lost, it seems to me. So I don't know, I just...
Hello, I'm a master student from the sinology department, and I first have to confirm if I understood something correctly before asking my question. So you said we shouldn't worry too much about an armed claiming of territory from of China towards Taiwan, because then they would deny their own Chineseness, or the Chineseness of Taiwan, right?
I think we are in a circle. That's what I'm saying. But I don't know where the exit is.
Yeah, but what I mean, if they would have to claim it forcefully with arms, then that would say, because if the Taiwanese would see themselves as Chinese, then there would be no need for an armed claiming, because maybe. And then, so this is the physical aspect. And then I wonder, maybe if we wouldn't worry about the military aspect of us, then if there's a kind of threat from the soft powers, because when I was in Taiwan, I was lucky to have a course in the Taiwan Sea, and my classmates had a very strong sense of Taiwaneseness, and there was one interesting fact which comes back to me again and again, that they said their younger siblings would use Douyin and would use not traditional 简体字, and I wonder why that would be, or if that is so important, because I think I would assume maybe using traditional signs is also a sign of identity marker and proudness of Taiwaneseness. And while writing with hand, I can understand maybe one is lazy and wants to be quicker with writing, but while typing in media such as Douyin, if then those Taiwanese teenagers use 简体字, what would that say about the danger of the soft power? Because then, I don't know if this is for all the Taiwanese teenagers or a growing trend, but yeah, so if they don't care too much about 繁体字, 简体字, or what that means for them, so what kind of scenarios could there be for the future? I mean, this is very confusing what I said, but...
Well, I don't know how many people, younger generation, using 简体字. I don't know. But the first part of your comments, I think if more people in Taiwan think they're Chinese, that doesn't really, reduce the chance of arms reunification. That sometimes, in a way, it may enhance it. Because if you consider you being Chinese and you are still refusing reunification, wouldn't that create more frustration? If you consider you being Taiwanese, not part of Chinese, it wouldn't be my responsibility to convince you you are Chinese. If you refuse, wouldn't be that my fault? So that would reduce the legitimacy of taking over Taiwan militarily. So I wouldn't think that people in Taiwan consider them being Chinese will reduce the chance of military conflict. I don't know. I just simply don't know. So there's different effect, I think. But the second part, it's important to keep the sense of being different from China. So if you use simplify Chinese, then you don't distinguish yourself from the younger generation in China. Wouldn't that be a problem for those people who consider Taiwanese have to be different from Chinese? And they have to do that in a very ritualistic and symbolic way. If they don't do that, then they become Chinese because they're living a Chinese life. Right? So they're eating Chinese diet, so people will say, no, don't do that. And some people say, oh, that's East Asian diet. That's not a Chinese diet. That's also the Japanese strategy in the early 20s. They're claiming that Confucianism is an East Asian, Confucius is an East Asian sage, not a Chinese sage. So Japan can own Confucius. But anyway, that's similar kind of strategy.
Thank you. I am Chang Xiaojie. I'm a PhD candidate in sinology. And I have a follow-up question to Britta's about the 简体字 and pinyin, because I visited Taiwan last December. And I noticed that in the railway station or the subway station, all the signs they used the pinyin instead of the old Taiwan zhuyin, and I also heard that a lot of young people, the Generation Z, can have watched a lot of Chinese TV series and use this Chinese social media, so they adapt the 简体字 very naturally as we did. We watch a lot of illegal Taiwanese translations of mangas and magazines. I'm also wondering what led to this change. For example, first pinyin, and is this the strengthening of the with the connection or alliance with Singapore, Malaysia, the Southeast Asian countries, the Sinophone countries, or is it moved to acknowledge the Chineseness in the Taiwan culture? Thank you.
Well, I don't have an answer to your question, but what you said, I think, is a very good testimony to the fluidity of the population as a collective. The population is a collective, have no preference, right? Collective have no preference. Nation state have no preference like individuals have, because you don't know. So collectively, what happened, you don't know. But if we consider everything in an individualistic way, we're always trying to collect individual preferences and predict political outcome by looking at the aggregate of individual preferences, then we have a problem. We don't know what people would do. We think we know what people would do, and we teach people that whatever you think affect our policy because we look at your preference. We add your preference together, that affect our policy. But people don't have really any influence over your policy. If I'm the government, if I lose votes, I step outside the government. I wait for 3 years, 5 years, and come back. When I lose the election, I wouldn't lose my life. I wouldn't lose my property. Nothing would happen to me, and I'll come back. If I don't come back, my daughter come back, my son come back, my wife come back. So eventually, it's all the same group of people doing the control, and people become a collective. For them, it's just collective. It appeared that they listen to individual preference. So we as individual voters, we think we affect political outcome because we can vote out incumbent who we don't like. We think we have power, but we don't because we don't change anything. That's the problem we have with liberal democracy. And if people start getting this message from China, learning from this little red book and start using simplified words, that's something you wouldn't expect by just collecting individual preference, asking them questions and collecting preference. You wouldn't test because this never be a question coming to you until someday you notice that. You start asking questions, then you see in aggregate, people already change collectively. So that's the problem of political science, social science. Always look at things in an individual's way, and always believe that individuals need protect. That's what Foucault said, that society has to be protected, right? If society is not protected, there will be no liberal democracy, then there will be no capitalism. So society has to be protected. You have to believe that society has to be protected because you have to believe that state is a threat. And if everyone believes state is a threat, the state will restrain themselves, and the capitalism will continue, right? That's all the Foucaultian analysis there. We are involved in the same situation that we don't know the people. We think we know, and we teach them how to know themselves. So nobody knows what's going on until things happen. That's how democracy in the post-colonies can be such an unpredictable way. Then you find out, oh, wow, all people are reading these little rare books. That's a surprise. And then you don't know the younger generation. Where do they learn that? There must be infiltration by the Chinese agent. And then you explain everything easily. You don't go back to the basic. You don't try to figure out what's the mechanism, cultural mechanism for people to connect. You find it's easy way out. That's Chinese infiltration.
Okay, we have a last question because we will continue the discussion tomorrow at 11:15, right? So don't worry, you can pose all your questions.
Mine is very short. You said that if China takes Taiwan with arms, it loses its Chineseness. And I think the Chinese government is maybe trying to find narratives to find a way to take Taiwan with arms and without losing its Chineseness. Do you see any way that it's moderately successful or any attempt that's maybe working?
Well, you have to wipe out the entire population in order to forget this. People don't forget this. If your military taken over a whole group, and then causing a lot of casualties, how can you? You have to wait for even 20, 30 years. People still remember. People may not just remember. People may create a new story out of it. So you're never going to get away from it. So I don't think there's any way that I don't think the Chinese government want to take military action at all, but they would have to act that they will definitely take action. Otherwise, no one would listen to them. People would run away. And that may happen if you force it. And they want you to think that way. Anyway,
thank you.
See each other again, those of you who want to come to the class tomorrow at 11:15, which is downstairs in 01, the room at the very, very back. And I'm really looking forward. So look at the readings, also the readings for the tomorrow evening's talk, so that we can start discussing and preparing ourselves for what is coming in the evening as well. Thanks so much. I have lots of questions, but I will pose them all tomorrow, because I'm not entirely convinced that we can do everything post-colonial, or decolonial. We will consider that tomorrow. Thank you very much, and looking forward to tomorrow morning. And I'll rush off because I'm teaching in 5 minutes. See you.